The push for U.S. climate legislation is now taking an international turn here in Washington. Today, the Commission on Climate and Tropical Forests released its blueprint calling for a plan to cut tropical deforestation emissions in half by the year 2020. The group says that action is a cornerstone of the U.S. climate response. Clean Sky's Tyler Suiters talked with some of the biggest names behind the report. And Tyler, this is a bipartisan commission?
It is, Susan. It reminds me a little bit of the U.S. Climate Action Partnership in terms of its diversity. You have former Republican Senators Chuck Hagel and also Lincoln Chafee, former Clintonites like James Baker and John Podesta. Then there are public and private leadership involved here. The leaders of John Deere and AEP on one hand, the leaders of the Nature Conservancy, and also the Center for Global Development on the other. So a diverse and somewhat broad commission here is involved in this. The point: tropical deforestation, according to these calculations, equals 17% of total global emissions. Taking action on this could mean that by funding international reduction efforts here regarding these deforestation progress across the world, that could reduce U.S. companies' climate costs by 50% overall. And the Commission made it very clear that one key to achieving this is through the growing role of greater technology.
Developed countries, the World Bank, Clinton Foundation and other foundations, the UN, various NGOs, and the private sector, including Google, are all working together to establish new measurement systems in tropical developing countries. And the developing countries are establishing those systems. In short, forests are the easy way for us to enter the climate problem, and forest systems help reduce poverty. With this barrier removed, it's now time for the U.S. to step up to the climate challenge.
Use our help and leadership.
Today, 8 members of the Commission on Climate and Tropical Forests on hand for the unveiling of the blueprint. First of all, the broad terms here. The Commission says the U.S. should lead on global partnership. It should create incentives to encourage forest conservation and also should enact climate legislation. More on that in a moment, because there are a few specifics included here as well, especially regarding cap and trade plans that are before Congress right now. The Commission wants the U.S. to have 5% of its emissions allocations going toward new international forest programs. Also, that the legislation should permit substantial offsets for U.S. companies. And finally, should create a financial intermediary, one that would aggregate offset supply and demand. Now, after this event, I talked with Dennis Welch. He is with AEP. He underscored once again the fact that private industry wants certainty regarding a cap on carbon emissions, but he went one step further, saying that private companies like his need to be proactive in the process. It seems that you are taking on or shouldering a pretty large role, or acknowledging that role, in terms of the private sector and utilities, especially in terms of facing a hard cap and dealing with global emissions.
Well, that we are. I mean, we supported Waxman-Markey because we think it's the right thing to do through legislation. As I said earlier, EPA is not the way to do it in our mind, because you lose avoided deforestation, you lose the incentive to do the Mountaineer projects of carbon capture and storage. So all that makes sense, and being one of the largest providers of electricity, the largest transmission company, we got to make sure that we're at the table and not on the table.
And to that end, there are some very clear goals laid out by this commission: a 50% reduction in tropical deforestation emissions by the year 2020. That's an international reduction. Also, U.S. public funding should be $1 billion. That is at least $1 billion by the year 2012, and $5 billion annually by the year 2020 in terms of fighting deforestation efforts. And finally, Susan, these numbers sound familiar. The commission wants an 80% cut in U.S. emissions by the year 2050. That is a little lower than what we've seen in Waxman-Markey and in Kerry-Boxer, both of which call for an 83% cut by 2050.
Tyler, let's talk about the latest now on climate legislation. We were expecting hearings on Kerry-Boxer to start in 2 weeks. Now you have word there's a delay?
Exactly. Co-author Barbara Boxer, during the rollout of Kerry-Boxer 1 week ago today, had said, quote, within weeks was her timetable in terms of beginning and potentially ending the markup process on the bill within her Environment and Public Works Committee. That's being pushed back apparently because of the modeling process here. I want to show you a quote now. I talked to a staff member from the Environment and Public Works Committee earlier today. Quoting now, the timing is connected to the modeling, which is underway. Now, the staff won't call this a delay, but hearings, there was at least word those hearings were supposed to start October 20th. Nothing is scheduled right now. The problem with the modeling, to some extent, is the fact that the allocations are still blank right now. It hasn't been divvied up. There are a number of placeholders as well in this bill, so there simply isn't all the objective information that would usually go into a modeling process for economic impact on something like this. Today, I did ask John Podesta about that. What does he think about the latest delay and the varied timelines and potential deadlines for this bill? He said quite simply, we hoped we'd be further along by now, but the immediate deadline isn't his problem, Susan. He says healthcare is really getting in the way. He said there is still time before Copenhagen, however, and former Senator Lincoln Chafee, who was on this commission, as I mentioned, said quite simply, we are optimistic about the process. Again, the end of the year or perhaps early December would be the deadline that Podesta and the rest of the commission want to see. And Susan, by the way, more of my conversation with John Podesta will be available tomorrow morning on the morning edition of the Energy Report. We talked about the legislation, what he wants in there and what is not in there. Also some insight into Harry Reid's plans. That's all tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern.
Okay, great, Tyler. We look forward to hearing more from John Podesta tomorrow morning. Thank you.